Third webinar of the year already. Strange and scary, sort of the year's gone so quickly. Lots going off at the moment. Lots of people with a lot of questions about what's going on in the property market, the rental market, and how some of the sort of situations going off in and around the world are impacting that. So we're going to try and cover off as many of those today as we can do. I'm going to start with the usual sort of review. So where's doing well, which areas are performing well. We will look at leads quite closely. We're going to start looking at sort of one area each month in particular. So diving into each of the territories a little bit more, where is doing well, and why you should sort of be looking at these areas and potential investment hotspots, and picking out the areas that are really, really performing at the moment. So covering that off, then one of the other things that I want to look at with you guys today is rent and legal protection. There is a lot of uncertainty at the moment. There are a lot of fears within the market, and this is something that in my eyes, investors need to be considering. I think it should be a tool in your portfolio that you're using to protect your investment, and making sure that if the worst does happen, you're protected, you're covered, and you can still sleep easy knowing that your investment is performing for you. So a little bit about myself. So my name's Chris. I'm the Lettings Director here at ERE. Been working in the lettings industry and property industry for over 12 years now. 5 of those have been at senior management level with sort of 2 of the larger corporates within the UK. And I now work closely with our sales team and running our lettings division to make sure that the properties that we offer are being looked after properly, but also providing as much insight as possible for our investors as to why lettings are good opportunity, good investment opportunity, and which areas that they should be looking at, and providing as much information as we can on legislation that's coming in, any changes that they need to be aware of, and how best to protect themselves. So if we're going to get started then, so we'll have a look at our March rental market update. We'll start off nationally. Every region in the UK so far this year has seen annual growth. Some areas significant, some less so. The one thing that we have certainly noticed is that city centres are back. There was a little bit of a movement away from city centres during 2020 and 2021 with lockdowns and the introduction of remote working and things like that. But it's fair to say that that rebound is now in full flow, and city centres are back. They're bustling. People are wanting to get back into city centres, and the demand over the last 6 months has been significant. Students as well. The return of in-person learning has been something that's contributed significantly to these areas seeing a fairly significant increase in rental demand. So the rental demand has continued to increase throughout 2022. The average rent in the UK now is at £1,069 per calendar month. That's up 8.6% on the same time last year. So nearly 10% increase on rentals year on year. Demand is continuing to outstrip supply. I think that's evident in the industry. It's evident everywhere. Property Mark, the governing body that's run by Arla, has recently reported that on average, each letting branch has just 5 properties available to rent at any one time. Take 5-10 years ago, you would probably be looking at that average being around 15 to 20. So there are 2 main reasons for this. Tenant demand is up here. Unfortunately, supply is down here. There are people that over the last years have left the market. There are people that are now taking this more seriously and are looking at setting up limited companies to make sure that they're maximising their return. But I think fundamentally, I think it's not a secret that the UK has a housing crisis. There is still not enough property being built to supply the demand that is there. So for me, that's one of the reasons that now is a great time to be looking at being a landlord. There is not enough stock. We are getting good properties coming onto the market and going before they've even had chance to hit Rightmove. They're going out to our database. They're going out to people that we know are looking, and they're gone before they've even hit the internet. Just moving on then. So current rental prices in Feb 2022. So if we're looking at a little bit more, looking at those figures in a little bit more detail, you can see Yorkshire and the Humberside, Feb 21 compared to Feb 22. So 680 is now increased to 730, so £50 a month increase. So that's probably sitting around that 8% that we reported earlier. West Midlands, Feb 21, 749, Feb 22, 800. Not seeing quite the same levels of increase, but the Midlands are somewhere that are probably sitting a year or two behind the rest of the country. If you can get in that area now, I think now's a great time. I think the prices reflect that there are some fantastic opportunities to be had there. The rents are starting to increase. I expect through the rest of this year and into next year that increase is going to continue and is going to start scaling up significantly. And then the Northwest, so Liverpool and Manchester, Feb 21, 782 up to 22, now at 860. So again, you can see that increase at 8 or 9%. It is really, really hot over in the Northwest at the moment. Manchester, particularly buoyant. Anybody who's been over to Manchester or seen the skyline of Manchester recently will see that the investment over in those areas is significant. And that's now starting to trickle over into Liverpool as well. I think you will start seeing some significant development in Liverpool. So London, if we take a little bit of a look at London, because it's interesting to see how the UK picture is impacted by London. The average rent in Greater London is currently at £1,757 a month. And you can see that since September, August, July of last year, that increase has been there. Interestingly, if you were to go a couple of months further back on March, what you can't see on there is the drop. London did suffer massively during COVID lockdowns. It saw rents decrease substantially and rapidly. It's probably fair to say that where it is now is probably back to where it was. That growth is going to still continue. We do believe that growth will peak again at some point in the next 6 to 9 months, I would say. But even with that flatlining, if you were to go a couple of months further into the beginning of 2021, even with that flatlining, the UK national continues to grow. So London is not having huge impacts on the rest of the UK. It is a little bit of a market in itself. And it tends to be isolated from the national trend. So if we were to look at some average sort of rental yields in the main cities, we've spoken about that the cities are back. So for us, this is where we can see our hotspot investment areas. So if you were to look at the UK, current average rental yield sits at 3.63%. Picking out the areas that we believe, for one reason or another, are good, strong areas to invest in. Preston City and top there. And I think that's mirrored by the fact that we're currently selling we've got 2 schemes over in Preston that we're selling. 6.6%. So it's approaching nearly double the national yield, average yield. Liverpool 6%, Leeds 5.9%, and then Derby and Manchester sitting at 5.7%. So you can see that these areas are outperforming the national average, and there are some fantastic schemes, fantastic opportunities in these cities. Preston, lots and lots of growth going off. Derby, 2 of the lesser known names in that list. I think it's fair to say everybody sort of knows where Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester is, even if you are sort of some of the overseas clients that we deal with. Preston and Derby are probably 2 of the areas that are sort of gems in there that people don't necessarily know about. They're areas that are benefiting from significant investment in the local areas. Employment's good. And I think both have got great education university campuses, either within the areas or within commutable sort of time frames of where these cities are based. So going in a little bit further, top 10 performing UK postcodes by rental yields. So these are the top 10 regardless of where they are. So you can see Nottingham, not a million miles away from Derby. I think Nottingham is a couple of years ahead of Derby though, so it'd be interesting to see. We've highlighted Derby as being an area that's performing well. We do envisage that that's going to continue, and it could be an area that hits double figures in terms of rental yields in the future. Investment is significant, and we do really predict big things for Derby. And one of the reasons being is its location in terms of Nottingham, what Nottingham's done historically and where it is now performing. So you can see two of the top 10 performing postcodes in the UK are actually in Nottingham, NG7 at 11.3%, NG1 at 11.10%. Bradford's an area that we quite close to where we are, and is an area that has historically done well and is now seeing those returns. M14 in Manchester, 10.10%, then going just under that 10%, sort of Newcastle, Yorkshire, Swansea and Cardiff, Southampton, and then Yorkshire again. So YO10, YO31. So these are the top 10 performing areas in the UK. A couple of those areas, the track capital, where those figures were obtained from, they do incorporate HMOs into there, which will obviously push that yield higher. But naturally, they take HMOs in all of those postcodes. So, it's still good quality data that's kept up to date. And we do use regularly to look at our developments, our due diligence. It's been a good, reliable source of information. So you can see Leeds, Birmingham, Cardiff, and Doncaster also appearing in the top 20 as well, further down under that list. So if we switch to Leeds as being our hotspot area for this month, like we say, what we're going to try and do is pick off a city each month and take a bit of a deeper dive into where it is perform, where these areas are performing. So these 5 areas in Leeds are the highest performing areas for tenant demand. So not the highest in terms of yields. These yields are underneath some of the more high performing areas, which we'll go on to in the next slide. But these are the 5 hotspots. These are the most sought after areas in Leeds and the most sought after postcodes. So you've got LS7, LS25, LS14, LS10, and LS12. LS10 being up there at 6%. That's your prime rental market. So Belle-Isle, Hunslet, these are the areas that are high rented demographics. Coming over to LS7, you are then looking at sort of Chapel Allerton and Scott Hill. These are the areas where working professionals mixed with students. So these might be the areas where the students don't necessarily want to be in Headingley or in the city centre, but still want to be able to get there if they want to go there. These are the areas that they're looking at. And that's sort of shown in that rental yield being a little bit lower because you've got the families in there, but being higher than somewhere like LS25, which is heavily working professionals, families. Bringing that yield down because the purchase price of the property is higher, but there is a ceiling on the rental. LS10, prime rental spot, potentially lower purchase price to get into those areas, but higher rentals, bringing that yield right back up there. LS7, LS12 sitting in the middle. Good mixture of both of those types of tenants, working professionals coupled with students and lower income families that are renting. If we flick that on a bit, so we'll stay in with Leeds, the top 5 performing areas and the yields that are associated with them. So LS4 up at 8.7%, LS2 7%, LS11, LS10 just sitting around the 6%. and then LS1, 6 and 9 just sitting underneath that 6% bracket. Leeds is probably another area that's now starting to really see investment, starting to see growth, and starting to see that change in skyline. Those of you that do sort of drive into Leeds, coming around the ring road, you'll have all seen Bridgewater Place and the Candle historically, that are both on that photo there. But now what you will see is that this the cranes are starting to become more and more prominent. You can see the lift shafts of some big developments going up. You can see the big student schemes that are just starting to be finished off. There's a lot of investment starting to come into Leeds, lots of PRS schemes that have now sort of the topping off's been finished. They're now sort of starting to take in tenants. And what that's doing is that's providing confidence into the marketplace. And you will see a lot of money starting to come into Leeds. It's one of the reasons that we picked it as our hotspot for this month. We expect that it's going to now really start taking off. Manchester 5-6 years ago was in a similar sort of position. There was a couple of big schemes. There was a couple of people that went early, that took the plunge to be the trendsetters, the early goers. And once that happened, once the demand was proven, everybody else followed. That's what we're starting to see with Leeds now. A couple of big schemes came, the demand was proven, and now you're seeing that there's a lot of private investment. There's a lot of bigger funds that are putting the money into schemes. There's a lot of redevelopment going off down the side of the train station and the canal. A lot of old mills, office blocks that are now being converted into residential, and the future's really bright. Okay, so that's all the positive. I think it would be wrong of us to not have a conversation about what's going off in the market, the fears that some people have. There is a lot of reason to be positive about where the market's at the moment. There's a lot of reason to be positive about where the market's going. There's reason to believe that the market's still really strong and is going to remain strong for some time. If we have a market where that sees a dip, I think a lot of people keep talking about a crash. My personal opinion is that that's not on the horizon. There may in areas be a leveling off, but there are areas that we've identified that are still strong. But there is uncertainty, and there is fear from landlords as to what some of the things going off in the economy are going to mean for their tenants, and ultimately may trickle down to them. One of the things that we want to speak about today is rent and legal protection. Rent and legal protection is something that I personally have been an advocate for a long time. It's an insurance policy. It has a cost to it, but it provides substantial peace of mind and protection to landlords. And I think if it's not something you've looked at historically, I think it's something that you should take a look at now. I understand it's not for everybody. Some landlords with larger portfolios can run the risk. If one property does go into arrears, if they do have a problem in one property, the rest of the portfolio protects it. Smaller landlords, maybe 1 or 2 property portfolios, it can have significant impact on your pocket personally if a tenant doesn't pay rent, if you've got mortgage outgoings on those properties. So why is now the time to discuss it? So there are genuine concerns relating to the cost of living. I think it's been evident for quite a while that there's been concerns in relation to the cost of living. I think the impact of the last 30 days have heightened that, and we are seeing costs increase. So fuel prices and energy prices, they're set to increase significantly. Yes, there was a 5% reduction in fuel tax last week in the spring statement. Are we seeing that? I think the AA have reported that actually since then 5p as opposed to 5%. About 2.6 pence of that 5p is actually finding its way to us as the consumer. People are still playing catch up. You know, there are people that were impacted by Brexit. There were people that were impacted by coronavirus. People have got concerns over the cost of living, inflation, and then ultimately what's happening in the Ukraine. Historically, and you know, for as long as we can track back, most rent arrears, a significant portion of rent arrears occur not because of malice, not because of people, you know, being difficult or deliberately going into a property, not paying the rent, causing damage and leaving, which I think is something that there's always been a fear of. That's not the case. A big percentage of rent arrears are for reasons that people could not predict. You know, genuine reasons, ill health, loss of employment. What we have to take into account is that the people in our properties, the people in these properties, this is their home. You know, it is not as simple as just turning round and going, well, I can't afford them to pay the rent, I'm going to move out. That's not an option. You know, the flip side of that, if they did that, they are homeless. They are on the streets. So as much as, you know, the idealistical way of looking at it is if they can't afford to rent a property, they should move out. It's not the case. You know, particularly in situations where ill health is something that's brought into play. So it's something that we have to take into account. So what is rental legal? Sorry, and what are the latest figures on rental arrears and repossessions? So the NRLA, the National Residential Landlords Association, recently found that approximately 840,000 people within the private rental sector were in rent arrears at the end of 2021. Now that's 7% of the portfolio. The UK portfolio with rental properties doesn't necessarily take into account councils, housing associations either. So that is private rental sector, people renting from individual landlords. 7% is a significant number. It's not a huge number. The good news is that actually, if you find yourself in a situation where you've got tenant in arrears or tenant in significant arrears, you're actually still unlucky. You're actually the minority. You're still part of the minority. But what is concerning and what needs to be taken into account is the number of repossessions that are having to go through court. So, and also needing to be factored into that is how long does it take to recover your property if you have to go to court? That's what that time frame has increased significantly. So 2020, 2021, lockdowns, the courts were closed. Yes, we went to virtual court hearings, but that took some time. It took some time to get into play, and it's not been the answer that the government were hoping it would be. So, according to the Ministry of Justice, between October and December last year, there were 2,706 repossessions. That was up from 500. That's up 548 from the previous year. A 20% increase in the amount of properties that are having to go to court. If you need to go to court at the moment to recover a property and you have to go all the way through to bailiffs, you are potentially looking at around 18 months for the point of you serving the Section 21 or the Section 8 to the tenant being evicted by a bailiff. Through that time, you're potentially not receiving any money. You're paying out mortgages. You're paying out schooling fees. You're paying out, for nursing homes. If these are properties where an elderly member's moved out, the property's been rented out to pay nursing home fees. These things still have to be paid. So rent and legal is something that can help in these situations. So essentially, it's a safeguard. So if legal disputes and rental arrears come into play, it's an insurance that kicks in. It allows you to relax knowing that your investment's protected. Yes, it's an additional outlay, but it can benefit you significantly if you are one of the unlucky few that does have tenant in arrears, that you have to go all the way through the process. So essentially what happens? Well, we still pursue your tenant for missed rent like we would do any other property. We will still chase the tenant. We will still try and recover that rent as quickly as possible, putting a payment plan in place, having a sensible dialogue with any tenant, and trying to find out the root cause of the reason why the rent's not being paid. Where it kicks in, the first thing that it does is mediation. So negotiation and mediation. So the insurers will get involved. The letters that go out to the tenants, as opposed to being from ERE or from whoever the managing agent is that's in play, they go from legal solicitors, they go from legal firms. It ups the ante a little bit. The tenants, in some instances, they just pay. It's sometimes a simple letter from the insurers saying that this is not going away and this is going to go legal is all that's needed to create a reaction, to get a reaction from the tenant to make payment for the rent. If not, it prompts communication, it prompts dialogue. It can find a resolution that means that court action is not needed. Steps are taken, payment plans are put in place to get things back on track. Huge amounts of rental arrears, which we see where our clients have rent and legal protection in play, are covered off before it has to go to solicitors, far more than where rent and legal protection is not in place. The reason being is that step up. The fact that solicitors' letters get sent out, the phone calls are made from solicitors. People realise this is not going away and it needs to be taken seriously. If eviction's needed, it will assist. It will cover your costs. You will continue to get paid rent whilst you are having your costs covered for solicitors, for court costs, for legal fees. It's all covered off. So what does it cover? So it covers a maximum claim value of £75,000. There's a nil excess. This is our policy. Some policies will differ. If you were to come and speak to us, if we were to be managing your property, and if this was the policy that we were providing for you, this would be what it covers. So 75% maximum claim value, nil excess, repossession costs. So for that 18 months we've spoken about, if this has to go that far, if we're going from the beginning to the end and it's taking 18 months, you will have your rent paid. You will have your solicitor's costs paid. You will have the court costs paid. Whilst all of this is going off, you can sit there stress-free, relaxing, knowing that your costs are covered, that you've got some of the best legal professionals in the industry looking after your interests to make sure that you remain protected and are properly protected, and you are going to recover the maximum that you can, regardless of what happens with the tenant, regardless of whether the tenant pays or not. You will be paid. You will receive your rent, you will receive court fees, you will receive legal costs, all whilst your tenant is not paying. Again, coming back to the one that we offer. So if you do go through a process, tenant voluntarily leaves or is removed through court process, you'll receive 75% of the rent for 2 months whilst you get the property ready to be relet, whilst the property is on the market being remarketed. What's the cost? So like we said earlier, there is a cost. And these are one of the products that you will pay for and you will hope that you never need. And there is a good chance you will never need. But if you do need it, the £30 per month, including IPT, insurance premium tax, that it's cost you, will be significantly less than what you recover. Significantly less. If you were to go down and look at a property, average rent that we spoke about earlier on, somewhere in and around the £700 a month mark, if this was to take a year and a half, you'd be looking at £10,500 worth of lost rent. That is before you've paid solicitors, before you've paid court costs, before you've paid for bailiffs, before you've paid for legal representation. You will be getting this. It is a product that, if you haven't looked at it, have a look at it. It might not work for you. That's fine. Not everybody takes this product out. That is completely understandable. But what I would say at the moment is, if you haven't explored it, now is the time to have a look at it. There's a lot of uncertainty. There are so many good reasons to become a landlord. There are so many reasons to be a landlord. Money is still doing more in property than it is in your bank account. We've all seen the rising costs of inflation. If you've got money sat in a bank account, it's costing you money to have it there. It's costing you money day after day. Investment is still what the majority of sensible people are doing. Money is better invested than in a bank account. This is a tool to mitigate your risk. if you are getting yields of 6-7%, which we've seen at the averages and which we've seen are being achieved in some areas, yes, this is going to have a cost. That's going to bring your yield down a little bit. But is it not better to be sat there thinking that if the worst did happen, you're protected, you're covered? So if you've not looked at it before, fine, go have a look at it. We can offer it. There are other products on the market. A lot of people say to me, I've got legal cover within my insurance. It's not the same. Have a look at it. Loss of rent, again, it's not the same. Most loss of rent that's included within a buildings or contents insurance policy is if you have an insurable risk and you lose rent through that. So if there's a flood, if there's a fire, if you can't rent the property out for any of those reasons, they will pay you rent. If your tenant doesn't pay, they won't. Legal fees, again, if a tenant tries to sue you for injury whilst they're in your property, the insurance company will cover your legal fees. They will not cover your legal fees for evicting a tenant though. So have a look at it, make your own mind up. This is not a hard sell. I'm a big believer in rent and legal policies. I have been for a long time. I think it's something that's very, very sensible to have in your portfolio if your portfolio allows you to. And the big one, it can be offset for tax purposes. So go away, have a look at it, see what your thoughts are, make your own mind up and see if you think it's something that you want to have in your portfolio and you want to have protecting you. For us, special offer at the moment, if you are a client, a new client or a current client bringing a new property over to us and we are managing it for you, we are currently providing 6 months free rent and legal insurance to anybody who instructs us. That's through the months of March and April. It has to be a new property. You can be a current client with us, but if you've got property elsewhere that you want to bring over to us, there are 6 months free rent and legal insurance available for anybody instructing us through the months of March and April. Okay, so time for questions. The chat, it is open. So if anybody does have any questions, we'll give it a minute or two, and I'd be more than happy to answer or try and answer, depending on what those questions are. If not, then we will be back in April. And we will we'll be back with another hotspot. So we'll cover the national average, and we'll pick up another hotspot, and we'll go through the market and what's happening. So we have got a couple of questions. So I think the first one, there was one a little bit higher up. So do I see government making it harder for buy-to-let investors, either individually or through limited companies? It's a great question, and I think that there are a couple of things that have to be taken into account. I think the first is coming back to we have a housing crisis in the UK. The government are not going to fix that housing crisis themselves. They are not going to be able to build the amount of property that they need to solve that crisis. So whilst I think the Spring Statement was interesting, there was nothing in there that suggested anything coming through or down the line. There are white papers at the moment. There is talk of more legislation, registers, for example, landlords having to become registered, having to pay to join the register. There is talk about that. I don't personally think that there's anything else coming in the way of taxes. I think where the government will possibly look at is holiday lets. It's something that there's a lot of talk about because it's classed as being a different business and a different business entity. It has different tax implications than just the individual rental market. So I think that there may be eyes being looked at, eyes pointed towards that industry. I think that there may be a little bit more legislation coming down the line in terms of carbon monoxide alarms becoming mandatory, having to pay to join a register. But I don't think there's massive change on the horizon. Hopefully that answers your question. If you've got more concern, if you've got something that is you want more details about, this webinar will be going out. My contact details will be going out drop me a line. More than happy to jump on a Zoom call with anybody and have a bit more of an in-depth conversation if people have got questions that they want more answers to. So the average rents, what size of property were that? Those figures are they're not manipulated in any way, shape, or form. They are the average rent for all rental properties within those areas. So it takes into account HMOs all the way through to the luxury properties on the market. It doesn't in any way, we don't pull them off for it's not a 2-bedroom flat or anything like that. We don't try and manipulate the figures. They are just a helicopter approach to those postcodes and those territories. Again, if you're looking at an area, if you want to know specifics, drop me a line. We can get hold of those figures for you if you've got questions for a specific area. So is there a demand for service apartments which could fetch a higher yield? Absolutely. We've got investment opportunities at the moment that we're selling that have yields in double digits. I think some hit heights of around 15%. So service apartments are a part of the market at the moment that there's a lot of interest in. So Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, the big cities, they're seeing huge amounts. It's a type of the market that there's a lot of interest going from private landlords now. So a lot of private landlords are looking at this and going, this is a way that I could adapt my portfolio. I could add a secondary property. I could have half my portfolio doing one thing, half my portfolio doing another, where you are prepared to go down that route. Yes, higher yields have been achieved. The one thing or two things I'd say, higher risk brings higher reward. So yep, great if you're getting the demand. If you're not, you can quite easily see them yields come down significantly. But there is big demand there at the moment. Do your homework. Make sure that you're looking at these areas and really looking at what you can and can't do and what the demand has been. Look at the demand historically. If there's been demand there over the last couple of years, then it's potentially a safe bet. Time. You've got to be prepared to put time into serviced accommodation. It doesn't come easily. And I think, we're probably all sensible enough to realise that if you're getting a bigger slice of the pie, then potentially it's going to take longer and take more of your time to do that and to get that. So another question, are values for furnished or unfurnished apartments? Again, it's everything. It covers, it doesn't filter down anything. That will include student lets, retirement properties, furnished, unfurnished, bungalows, flats, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom terraces, everything is covered in there. So it is the average for the UK national average, and then when we've gone down a little bit deeper into some of those areas, it's the average for those specific postcodes with no filter attached. Okay, so another question on there. Does ERE cover the whole country or only Midlands and the North? We cover the whole country. We don't go into Scotland. We don't go into Wales. They have very different legislation. We look after the whole of England. So going up from Newcastle, Middlesbrough, the Scottish borders, all the way down to Portsmouth, Southampton, Hull, over to Liverpool. We cover all of it. The majority of those areas we cover through our own staff. If it's an area that we don't cover, we have third parties, a pool of third parties that we use. The costs are the same, regardless of whether we look after it or somebody else looks after it. The costs are the same. The benefit for a client, you have one point of contact. You have a designated, appointed property manager that you speak to. So if you've got a portfolio that scatters the UK, you can have one call once a week, once a month, whatever works for you, and you can box off, go through all of your portfolio in one go, get all the questions that you need. We've got clients with one pension pot property in Liverpool through to clients with 50 to 60 properties scattered around the UK, and we can service the needs of all of those clients. So anywhere in England, we can cover one point of contact, competitive fees. If you do want more information on that, then drop me a message. I'll send over my Calendly link. We can have a conversation about your portfolio and see if we can help in any way, shape or form to make your life easier with that. Okay. So I can see there are a few people that have stayed on for questions, which is great. Can't see that there are any more questions left unanswered. I'm just going to give it a moment or so. If there's nothing further from anybody, then thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. Hopefully you found it useful. If you've got questions that we haven't covered today, by all means, send them over. Let's have a conversation afterwards. I'm here to help. There are a lot of people within this industry that send stuff out, promise to answer your question, answer 75% of it, and then tell you that to get it answered in full, you need to go on a weekend course and pay out thousands and thousands of pounds. That drives me insane. I just want to help our clients. Hopefully, if I can add value and provide you with information, you'll use our services to manage your property. That is literally all we ask from you. There's no hard sell. More than happy to help whenever and however you need us to. So thank you very much for your time today. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in April for the next rental market update.